All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight to join us for a virtual conversation with author Paola Ramos in honor of Finding Latinx in search of the Voices Redefining Latino Identity. For this event, Paola will be joined in conversation by Cecile Richards. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore is located is the occupied, unceded, and seized territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux people. If you would like to learn more about this, one place to begin is by visiting native-land.ca. My name is Carly Nussbaum, and I work as the Outreach and Sales Liaison for Women and Children First. We are one of the last remaining feminist bookstores in the United States, so a big thank you for supporting us. Our bookstore has once again temporarily closed our physical doors due to the current COVID surge. So we highly encourage you to support us and the authors tonight by ordering your copy of the book and more from our website at womenandchildrenfirst.com. There's also a convenient buy the book box at the bottom of your screen. Events are a vital part of our store's mission, and if you're interested in learning more about our events each month, you can visit our website or sign up for our monthly newsletter. For example, coming up on Thursday, you can join us as we celebrate the paperback release of Erosion, Essays of Undoing by Terry Tempest Williams. Now, I have the privilege to introduce the authors who will be in conversation tonight. And just as a reminder, everyone is welcome to ask questions anytime using the Ask a Question box located at the bottom of the screen. Or give like a wave in the comments, because that's fun too. Cecile Richards is the co-founder of Supermajority, former president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, New York Times bestselling author of Make Trouble, and lifelong organizer for women's rights and economic justice. And the author of Finding Latinx, Paola Ramos, is a host and correspondent for Vice and Vice News, as well as a contributor to Telemundo News and MSNBC. Ramos was the deputy director of Hispanic media for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign and a political appointee during the Barack Obama administration. And she also served in President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. And so I want to talk about this book is amazing. Finding Latinx is a beautifully woven tapestry of voices and experiences, all in service of finding out exactly what the term Latinx means to those who use it and even those who do not. The exploration of identity, both collective and individual, is a powerful reminder that checkboxes only tell a small part of the story of who people are. I absolutely love getting to visit with and feel welcomed into the communities Paola visits and to learn of their struggles, their strengths, and their vision. And on that note, I am so excited to hear the conversation tonight. So without further ado, please welcome Cecile Richards and Paola Ramos.
Thank you, Carly.
Thank you so much.
No, it's so great to be here with you, Paola. And also just want to really, underscore too, Women and Children First is a great bookstore. And I hope everyone supports them, support your local independent bookstore wherever you are, especially at this time of the pandemic. So Paola, it's great to see you, although I think you're like way far away. Where are you chiming in from tonight?
So I just got to Arizona. I was flew into Phoenix a couple hours ago. Now I'm somewhere between Phoenix and Tucson. And so the story, I'm like, where am I right now? But that is the story of my life. But the story that we're here to tell is just how Indigenous folks were so responsible for making sure that the state flipped blue, right? Yep. And I think so much of the narrative obviously is focused on, Latinas and the Latinx community, but I think in that we have to recognize that, Native Americans played a huge role. Yep. And so I'll be talking to some organizers in the next couple of days here.
How awesome. Well, so we'll get to politics because obviously your book is so rich, as Carly said, with the stories and experiences of folks around the country. So we'll definitely wind back, and what an amazing moment that you're in Arizona and that we've just somewhat finished this last election. And so what a great time to be talking to you. So yeah, everyone make sure you know about the book, and we'll just be promoting it, and buy it for your friends. I thought I'd start with just you actually write in the beginning of the book that Latinx is still transforming from a word into a movement, which I thought was really wonderful. And you talk about sort of the whole coming out for you and others of what it means to be part of the Latinx world and community. So maybe for folks who this is a new term to, or, would love to hear your take on this, and because it is the theme of the book.
Of course. So for me, the way that I think of the word Latinx, right, that X that many people are, especially within the Latino community, many people seem to be rejecting this, that X. The X is nothing but an invitation for anyone among the 60 million Latinos of us that has ever felt left out of the community, the story, or the narrative of what it means to be us, right? And so that can be someone like me, that when I was growing up and I saw images of what Latinas looked like on TV, on telenovelas, I never saw myself in that image, right? So it can be for young Latinas, older Latinas, Afro Latinas, Indigenous folks, queer folks, liberals and conservatives, right? Because I think when I say the word Latino, Latina, or Hispanic, I'm pretty sure, and Cecile, I'm sure it happens to you as well, an image comes to mind, right? We think of us in a very specific way. And so the only thing Latinx tries to do is break that stereotype, right? Include more people in a term that, that hasn't necessarily been inclusive for a long time.
Right. Well, and this book is full of the people you meet and their various, the diversity of their lived experience and where they came from, or where their communities were based. And I love that. I actually just read an interview you did, I think it was in The Cut yesterday or something. I just saw it posted, which I love, because you said something that actually really struck me in the book. You said that your mother taught you how to find the dignity in people. And to me, what this book is such a gift, because that is really your story. It's what makes you such a great reporter. It makes you such an incredible organizer, is your ability to empathize and also hear the stories of people that are really widely different. And again, I think that's a thematic throughout this book, that the Latinx community is not a community. It is a collection of millions of people with their own stories. So tell me a little bit about that, and how you got these stories and what that experience was like.
Yeah, just going back on what you just said about my mom, right? So you're right. Like my mom is someone that has always taught me to, in any conversation, in any scenario that you're in, and regardless of whether or not you think you're on the same page with someone, you always find someone's dignity. And so I think it's interesting, right? Because we're in a moment where I think a lot of people are trying to figure out, and I know we'll get to politics, but since you mentioned this, like, I think a lot of people are trying to figure out if there is such a thing as the Latino community, right? Or the Latino vote. And I think for me, there is, because I go back to what my mom told me. And I think that's a story that most people within the Latinx community have in common, which is someone in our families immigrated to this country in order to allow us, right, to lean into our rights, right, to be empathetic, to embrace. And so I always go back to what my mom told me. And I think that's that element of like searching for people's dignity is something that we all, I hope, have in common. Anyways, that just reminded me of that. The way that I thought about finding these stories was, to me, I go back to like the 2016 campaign, right? I was like, my fancy title was Deputy Director of Hispanic Press. But in that role within politics, I thought I knew the country. I thought I knew our battleground states. I thought I knew all of these different regions in the country. And then it turns out, it's 2016 and the day after the election, and, less than 50% of Latino eligible voters showed up. And so the way that I structured it was, I wanted to go states and back to these regions that I thought I knew in 2016, but I didn't. And my whole idea and strategy behind was sort of like traveling with a blindfold and talking to people that I had never talked to, right? So here I'm in Arizona. Typically, I come here and I talk to dreamers. Well, the last time I was here, I wanted to talk to indigenous folks and indigenous migrants, people that didn't speak Spanish or English, but spoke in Mam or in Ganjobal. And I did that in every state, from California to Arizona to Texas to Florida, sort of like rediscovering these states. And you're right. And once you do that, right, once you do that exercise, a completely different picture emerges, right? Suddenly you start to understand that Latinos obviously look like me, but that there's over 3 million Afro-Latinos, right? I discovered that there's over like 250,000 Latino Muslims, right? That there's over 1 million indigenous folks, right? That trans folks are not only in New York City where I live, but like all around the border organizing. And so, yeah, so that was the exercise, right? And including in places like the Midwest, right? The idea that I had of the Midwest was that it was a region that was always going to feel foreign to me, but it was the opposite, right? When I went to the Midwest, I felt most at home because I talked to people, and I forced myself to sort of and find community in places that I didn't even know existed.
Well, I love that part. I too love the Midwest because it's so caricatured in many ways, and the depth that you get into is great. I love that you wrote. I don't know if you wrote this literally, but kind of part of what I got from the book is that the Latinx experience in part is feeling that you never quite belong, right? And you use the term that you're a perpetual foreigner. That's and right. But I love the your description of the ways and the stories that you tell where people have recreated their culture and their music and their food and experiences from maybe where they came from, or maybe just where their families came from the Nuevo Leon restaurant in Chicago, which just made you just want to get on a plane and go there right now, to the Los Dells Music Festival in Wisconsin. Who knew, right? Same. And then I love the story, even in Poughkeepsie, New York, of the Oaxacan community that is now sort of has been there, but is now just fully flourished. I thought those stories were so rich, and the people that you talked about were so rich that you could really see this incredibly diverse tapestry across the country of the Latinx community but all in extremely different ways, and just the beauty of how people had really recreated their own cultural experiences here in the U.S.
Yeah, and for me, so I think if we were to find stories because of numbers, right? If we were to quantify why stories are necessary, then we wouldn't be telling these stories, right? Because the story that I was always told is, why are you going to the Midwest, right? The Latinos are just 6% of the entire Latino population, or 9% of the entire population are in the Midwest. That was always the argument, right? Why go there? But obviously that's the wrong thinking, right? You go for the stories where almost there's no numbers behind it. And for me, when I approached the Midwest, again, I had been there during the Obama years. I had lived there in 2012 during the re-election campaign. But again, I lived in my little bubble. And the way that I approached that whole region in the Midwest was letting myself be led by culture, right? Instead of by numbers, letting myself be led by food. What were people cooking in Chicago, right? How did the restaurant industry survive around these years? And you come to understand that restaurants for many Latinos, and obviously folks that are listening to this know this, it became a refuge, right? It became a refuge for immigrants. Food became more than just food. It was a form of survival, of creating home for Mexicans for decades and generations. And so that's how I approached Chicago, right? I wanted to see how the community was sort of surviving through food. And I did the same thing in Wisconsin, right? There it became music, right? What were young Latinos listening to? And then the moment that you approach that, these places, as you said, that feel foreign, it's the opposite, right? All of a sudden I saw young hip hop, Latino DJs, hip hop artists that were playing with bachata and R&B, and young mariachi players in the south side of Milwaukee, that were their first in their families to go to school, and that they wanted to make their families proud through mariachis and music. And then I went to Minnesota, And there became art, right? All of a sudden you look up for a second and you see that, you know, these beautiful murals and colors, and a lot of them are being created by Latinx artists. And then in Iowa, it became religion. And so anyways, the story was that if you allow yourself to be led by your instinct and your gut and what feels like home, the country does feel yours. No, the country does start to feel very differently. And then you said something about this idea of feeling like perpetual foreigners, right? So that's something, Cecile, that I found in almost every story that I covered, right, from coast to coast. And the research shows you that even though young Latinos, the majority of young Latinos are born in this country, right? Like 85% of young Latinos are US born. There's this idea that is ingrained in our brains that others are perceiving us as if we are like foreigners, right? And that is in the psyche of young Latinos. And so we'll get into the politics, but I think so much of this election wasn't just a referendum on Trump. It was a referendum on this idea that like young Latinos belong, right? We are no longer foreigners in this country. So anyways, all of these things that I saw in the book started to all of a sudden like emerge in these results, and it was beautiful to watch.
Right. Well, and the the examples you just gave of, and particularly I remember the one, I think it was in Wisconsin, and the music scene was just the enormous pride that just seeing kids who may not otherwise have felt a sense of belonging, and then suddenly they're able to just, you know, through their music express this. And that one of the other themes of the book, I think, and some of the most compelling characters, you talk a lot, I mean, you deal with a lot of issues of shame, of, you know, and look, it's everywhere, but you specifically talk about in the Latinx community, whether it is addiction, whether it's mental health, whether it is sexuality. And I know you say at some one point in the book, I think in talking about Vidal and also Carolina, that the whole idea of learning to love yourself. And I thought some of the most compelling stories in the book, and maybe you want to talk about one of them, was just these folks who had struggled through so much, but at the end learned to love themselves. I would even actually put Ado, I don't know if that's how Ado, but I think that whole idea of throwing off all of the taboos, all of the otherness, and then just living these incredibly rich lives. So anyway, maybe you could share with,
of course,
one of these. I mean, they're all amazing.
I'll share a little bit on Ado and Carolina. So Ado, the story of Ado, right, is Ado's a dreamer, and he was undocumented most of his life. And so we met years ago, but I got a text about maybe like a year and a half ago, and he was explaining to me how his dream was to perform in RuPaul's Drag Race, right? That's what Ado wanted to do. And so he couldn't because of his undocumented status, right? So it turns out that if you're undocumented or you're a dreamer, you simply can't compete. No, you can't be competitive. And so Ado, who's from Arizona, he's from Phoenix, he made it his sort of goal to participate in what I found out was Miss Gay America, which apparently is like the largest beauty pageant like in the country. And it's like the biggest drag show. And so again, right, it seems kind of like a joke. It seems like this like funny thing, but for Ado, right, who's from Arizona, who's from a border state, he went over to St. Louis, which is where Miss Gay America was taking place. And so the story of Ado became a story of coming out, not just as undocumented, right, but coming out in a stage as undocumented, as a dreamer, as a gay Latino man in the Midwest, right? And so again, it's he spent so much of his life in the shadows. He spent so much of his life being targeted, but then there's these moments that he's created to finally feel proud of who he is, right? And to make a political statement, and which he did. And I remember, sitting on the other side of that stage and watching him, but instead of watching him, I was mostly watching at the crowd, right? He was amongst a crowd of mostly white folks who, perhaps it was their first time seeing eye to eye with a dreamer, seeing eye to eye with an undocumented person, and their jaws were like dropping, because here was Ado saying like, I'm undocumented, and I'm a drag queen, and I'm Latino, and I want to win this contest, right? And so people didn't really
the American dream. It's like, go great.
Exactly. And,
I know.
And he lost
Yeah.
so badly, but he won, right? Like
Yeah.
he was a winner. And anyway, so that story really stuck with me. And Ado was one of the organizers in Arizona flipping Maricopa County, right? He spent, months and months organizing, and his best tool was through drag. And I remember I was like, but wait, like, you're in Arizona, like, how are people reacting to this? And he would always tell me, he was like, I have more power. Like, you will look at me harder and you will pay attention to me if I'm in drag and I tell you to vote versus if I'm not. And so anyways, he's found a way to weaponize his story, and it's been very powerful. And then the other story you mentioned was Carolina. So Carolina's, I think, is perhaps one of the people that has mostly impacted me, I'd say, from all the stories. And the story of Carolina, just so folks know, she's a transgender woman from Mexico. She had to leave Mexico when she was very young because she was trans. And again, for context, if you're a trans person in Latin America, you're, on average, people don't live beyond the age of 35 because of the violence, right? Because of the assault. And so, like many trans folks, she came to the country, she crossed the border. But the story for me of Carolina is someone that, as I sort of mentioned in the book, right? I think we all can live our lives and we keep pushing through, even in amidst the hardest of times, like throughout COVID, but we push through because we see some light at the end of the tunnel. No? There's something that gives us hope. And some people don't get that. Some people don't have a light at the end of the tunnel. And Carolina is one of those people, right? Who just, like, she gets up every day. She faces discrimination. She's been in ICE detention on and off for many times. She's been assaulted. She can't get jobs, but yet she believes so hard that she is worthy of change. And in this American dream that has been promised to her, she believes so much in it that she keeps going, and she wakes up every day. And so to me, that is, when people are like, are you tired? I'm like, no, I see her, and that keeps me going. Right. And so anyways, that's just one of many stories that impacted me.
No, but that is why the book is so wonderful, is that you just get introduced to, people who are so inspiring, many of whom, as you said, have been through things that are just unimaginable and have come out the other end and are, have created a life for themselves. It's really phenomenal. Mm-hmm. I'm going to read something you wrote, because it is kind of at the end of the book, but I still think it's related to what you're talking about. And I thought it was really wonderful. You wrote, as the immigrant story goes, so many of our ancestors were forced to settle for mediocrity for the sake of being accepted in this country.
Yeah.
And then, but a few chapters earlier, you also wrote that something about our generation that really differentiates us from our parents is we don't compromise our truths.
Yeah.
And there are so many stories. I mean, you talk about your relatives, you talk about your grandparents, you talk about your abuelo, and your journey, and particularly talking to a whole new generation, there is this spirit of that is so inspiring. So talk a little bit about that. And I mean, you must see this in your own family. I don't know I remember, you talk about how your family and your aunt and your parents think about you, but this is a big generational change.
It is
shaking off, the have to be this certain way.
It is. And I think, again, when I look at the insane voter turnout that is happening, a lot of it is that story, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, in every state that I went to, right, whether I was talking to, the children of farm workers in the Central Valley, here in Arizona, young Latinas during the Kavanaugh hearings, in Texas, and women that were fighting for reproductive rights in the Valley, in all the stories, everywhere, literally everywhere that I went, the one underlying theme was that the younger generation, even though everyone had a story of pain in them, all of them had that one thing in common, which is that they saw their parents with their own eyes sort of succumb to these realities and take, just sort of say yes to everything, to assimilate. They saw their parents sort of lived their whole lives knowing that in order to survive in this country, you had to assimilate, right? Or maybe it wasn't okay to speak in Spanish, and that the rights that were given to you were just, they were enough, that you didn't need more. And so the story here is that everyone that I talked to rejected that, right? They rejected that normalization of pain. They rejected that status quo. They knew that they were worthy of more. And so I think this political change, and I'm in Arizona. Arizona is a perfect example, right? A lot of the children of people that saw their parents be criminalized by people like Joe Arpaio or SB 1070, all those people that grew up here in Maricopa County, they turned out to vote because they saw the way that their parents were treated. And that there's a story like that in every single state, right? Every single state. Again, I think from my perspective, I have immense privilege in that sense, right? I think both of my parents, they're both journalists. They both paved ways for me, in order to do what I do. My light skin has granted me, rights and a voice that, that many Afro Latinas, Indigenous folks, and documented folks can't. And so I'm always very, very conscious of that. But I do, I do think growing up, there was potentially a box that I could have been in,
Mm-hmm.
And I could have perhaps, hid my sexuality for longer. And I did. There were times where I even to this day, when I go to Mexico, I don't feel like I can fully come out ever. Yeah. I don't. And so, part of it has been, and even through this book, has been a growing exercise of me of being okay to say no, not because it's the right thing to do, but because I deserve it, right? I don't need to hide who I am anymore. And so, anyways, I think it's incredible to see all of that manifested finally in like political power.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Well, let's talk about politics because I feel like we're just we're dancing around it, and you're in Arizona, and none of us can still know exactly what happened. But so there are all kinds of important statistics. You write one in the very beginning of the book, which I think is really important for folks to just wrap their head around, which is a half of all Latino voters are millennial voters, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, super young, and growing. Now the second largest voting, as a group, even though we know, as we're saying, this is not a monolith and it's extremely diverse and obviously something that folks in politics don't always understand. You talk about AOC, not just for her, but this idea that you could start before, it was your turn, just as I like to say, start before you're ready. And also that now increasingly, even my home state of Texas, finally Sylvia Garcia, Veronica Escobar, our first two Latinas going to Congress, just completely changing for the first time ever, the image of what it means, what a Congress person looks like, this whole idea that kind of that anything is possible. And super complex, right? This is something, and I love that thanks for the homage to my home state. And I used to work in the Rio Grande border for years. And when you write okay, if political consultants and pollsters really want to understand communication, come to the Rio Grande border. I mean, it's so right on. So anything you want to say? I mean, stuff that's in the book, what you're observing now, because clearly since the book came out, we had an election and we're going to have more. So tell us what you're thinking.
I mean, I think we're all trying to figure out exactly what this all means. I think my first story, my first gut is that it was the voter turnout in itself, right? Like this idea that in the past 6 presidential elections, consecutively, our voter turnout, the Latinx voter turnout, has always been lower than 50% for the past 6 presidential elections. Now it's projected that it's going to be around 60 to 70%. And so I think when I first started seeing those stats, to me, I kept thinking of all the young people that I had talked to, right? In all of these different states with all of the different traumas and histories. And I want to think that a lot of those folks, a lot of those young Latinos, Latinas, and, those were the ones showing up. And I think, because the story was so much like Latinos were at the center of the story, right? I think the beginning of the story was Donald Trump. Latinos were one of the biggest victims under this administration. And so I think when we are part of the story and when we can sort of drive that story and take out the person that has victimized us, then that obviously drove a lot of people out. And so I think that in and of itself was just like a big lesson learned. When you're part of a story, when the messaging is that, it works. But the beauty is that it was more so than about Donald Trump. It was more than anything about like finally Latinos taking into their own hands that they belong, right? And it wasn't necessarily that they had to wait for parties to tell them that, right? Or for any candidate to knock on their door. It's that they organized themselves, as you know, right. they did it themselves, and they want to vote themselves, right? And so I think there's a lot to unpack in terms of the statement that young Latinos were making. You know, I think there's this, obviously there's the obsession to talk about the Miamis and the Valleys of the world, and what did that, you know, that famous Cuban American vote that did go Republican, and the Rio Grande Valley, obviously. I think it's important to unpack that, but I still think that the larger picture is that when we were given a choice, and when we were given like just the choice in this country, like overwhelmingly Latinos following Black women chose to drive this country towards change, and I think in historic ways. Now, I think if I step back a big amount of time, like there is an identity crisis that I think Latinos are going through, that is pretty grave. And I think we don't pay attention to it, and we're going to keep being divided, right? And we're going to keep looking the other way. And if we don't pay attention to the root cause of what's turning a significant amount of Latinos towards Trump and Trumpism, I think that can be a pretty big problem long term. And so that, you know, perhaps that's sort of my next focus, understanding what is driving people toward the other side, because I think it goes beyond politics and candidates and policies, right? I think it goes back to that feeling of belonging. Who's making whom feel like they belong, and that's not politics. That's like a larger thing, I think.
Yeah. Yes. And I mean, I'm so glad that's what you're looking at and thinking about, because I mean, all throughout the book, it wasn't the, I don't know, there was a stated overarching theme, but there is a lot of patriotism in this book. There is a lot of, you know, sort of what I think of as like, quote unquote, American values, you know, hard work and, you know, sense of community, sense of family, belonging. And so you can see how some of these messages, it's why I think it's so interesting that you've been on the other, now you're completely 100% in the day-to-day talking to folks. You've also been in the political world. And I think more than most, and you talk about this, I mean, you can see it in the book, you can see where we're missing stuff. Like there's folks that are making ads and talking about politics that are missing something fundamental.
Yeah. When you talk about the patriotism, I mean that to me was one of the most like shocking things where I found patriotism, like where I found people defining what it meant to be American. I found the best lesson of that in the South, in Georgia, in South Carolina, not among Spanish speaking Latinos, but among like the indigenous Guatemalan Mayan community. Right, like that when I saw that, right, it was like in these red counties in Georgia, and I suddenly like stumble upon this like incredibly rich and vibrant and big Mayan Guatemalan community who has been there for generations, you know, for decades, and their way of defining patriotism was again like the younger generation of Mayans and indigenous folks knowing that their parents for years were scared to speak in Mam or in Cancobal or in their indigenous languages, knowing that they saw their parents sort of be scared to wear whatever clothing they wanted to wear, to speak out loud. And they're choosing the opposite. No, they're choosing to lean into these languages and their trajes and their customs, and that is their way of saying that this is the America that they always wanted, right? To be able to be whomever they want. But so I think the interesting thing with the younger generation of Latinos, as you said, right, it's the majority of Latino voters are now millennials and Gen Zers. Unlike our parents who had to define what it meant to be American through someone else, right? Because most of them were immigrants and weren't born in this country. The big difference is, and I think that's fundamentally going to change politics, is that young Latinos, we are the ones that are defining what it means to be American in a way that our parents never could, right? We don't need a Donald Trump or a Republican to tell us how to be us, right? Because most of us are US born and we've adapted our own way of what it means to be us. And so that I think is a fundamental shift that is happening where, you know, no one can otherize us truly.
Right.
And I don't think any, you know, I think it's important for both Democrats and Republicans to take that into consideration, because what it means to be American for us is very different from what it meant to from our parents. And I don't think that's a whole other, you know, dynamic.
Right. Well, and as you say, and again, I know a lot of folks have been saying for a long time that it is not a monolithic experience, and you can't assume just by translating an ad into Spanish that somehow you're actually, you know, engaging a community. I'm going to tell folks, I haven't seen any questions, but I hope it's not my own incompetence. But I think if you want to ask Paola a question or anything, you can put it in the chat and I'm going to look there. I know we saw somebody from Poughkeepsie, I think, or at least was a Poughkeepsie fan. So yeah. You got that. Because I did. I love that I love the chapter on Poughkeepsie.
That's one of my favorites too.
Yeah, no, it was just so, and also the idea that it's kind of this Republican mayor, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of realizes, oh my gosh, this is actually not a threat to life in Poughkeepsie. We're actually like building community and the economy. And no, it was just and I'm sure there are other examples, but it was a perfect one.
In Iowa. Yeah.
Yes.
When I went to Iowa, I went to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, right? Which is a county that Trump had won in that region. Mm-hmm. But anyways, again, within the Midwest, when I was sort of following religion and art and music in Iowa, I just stepped into one of the churches, predominantly white church. Most people spoke English, but the sort of like the pastor there was so committed to embracing the immigrants that were there, and many of whom had lost some of their family members during a raid. And there was no question, right? Like, it was like politics to a side. If you are a person of faith, fundamentally, you're someone that knows that, you know, you first embrace someone, right? Rather than put them to a side. And so to me, I found these like examples of patriotism in the, like, not randomness, obviously now it makes sense, but in the most unexpected places, right? And then I drove a couple hours like north from where I was in Mount Pleasant, and I found like this city that was, I'm blanking right now on the name, but it was like, you know, more than 60% of like the English students in the school were speaking Spanish. It was completely, everything was like so intertwined, and like I just had never seen anything like that. Mm-hmm. So.
You talk about this, and you kind of referenced it a minute ago, and there's a great chapter about going back to Miami after sort of being out in the world and just kind of seeing your community with new eyes, and also the experience of kids you went to school with, like what it was like coming back home. So what, I mean, it's such a hack question, but
what's happening with Miami? Yeah.
Well, of course, I mean, I guess what's happening with Miami, if you could figure that out, that's interesting. But also what would you, now that you're meeting all these young people, and as you said, there are things you might have done. What are the things you wish you had done? What would you tell your younger self now? Because I assume it's somewhat what you're gonna want to tell young people in the Latinx community. What would you hope for them?
I mean, when I think of myself, in a place like Miami, when I was way younger, and again, like when I was like 15 years old in Miami, like the norm was, I lived, you know, you live among a pretty conservative Cuban American community where I thought that the way to be Latina was in this box. And so even at that time, like I knew that I was queer, but I waited so long to sort of come out because I didn't fit this like these molds of what it meant to be like a Cuban American in Miami, a Latina, right? And so, you know, I wish I would have sort of come out before, because I knew I had the support I wish I would have, dressed however I wanted and like not wear that makeup that they wanted me to wear because I was supposed to be a Latina from Miami that looked exactly like what the telenovelas told you to do, right? So I wish I would have like stepped out of that and felt comfortable before someone else told me that I was allowed to do that. I wish I would have pushed back in, the countless dinners where I was amongst a sea of Cuban Americans and not one single like Afro-Cuban, or Black Cuban, where Miami's full of Black Cubans, right? And so I think it's very easy to be part of particularly in a place like Florida, it's very easy to be in the bubble, which is what I always talk about when I'm there. It's extremely easy to be in the bubble. And so you truly have to force yourself out. You have to make an effort to just step out and see, right? Because the second that you see Miami out of that bubble, it is a completely different Miami. Like, it's so interesting. The Miami that happened on election night, which is when Trump won on Tuesday, that Tuesday night when Trump won Florida, was so different 5 days later when the election was called. Suddenly I stepped out in the streets of Miami and I had never seen, it was like Black people and Latinos and Venezuelans and Cubans and queer people all in one community. And you truly have to step out to see it, right? And so I think, my advice is always to just step out of whatever shadow that you're in before. If you're ever hesitating, do it before. Don't wait until anyone gives you the green light.
Right, exactly. Don't wait for permission. I completely agree. Okay, I'm embarrassed to say, I think there's 2 questions that have been asked, but I cannot see them. Sorry, okay, Carly.
Here. No.
Can you see them?
Maybe I can find them. Let's see.
I don't know. I've been trying to read them, but I can't. So if you see them, you can also, okay, here we go. Thank you. I was going to say, why don't you put them in the chat, and that way we could actually read them. So thank you. What's the role? Oh, okay. I'm gonna let you try to answer this, although I feel like this is not something you should have to answer, which is, what is the role of white people to build a sense of belonging and inclusivity for these beautiful young people? I mean, the question of the day, but yeah, I'll let you say this is your hour, so I'm gonna let you.
No, please, Cecile,
listen. My friend, if I had the answer to that, yeah, we'd be in a lot better shape. But no, but I'm curious what you think, because it's a conversation we've been having for about a year and a half now. So
yeah, I mean, I think the first step right now for everyone is just to listen, right? To listen to people, right? To try and put your biases to aside and to listen to what people are telling you. I think always, when you step into rooms, when you step into work, when you see amongst your friends, if everyone looks like you, that's problematic, right? And so you, again, going back into like us making efforts, the only way that we start to create these inclusive environments is if you start changing your own environments amongst yourselves, and you start sort of putting aside, relearning, unlearning what you've learned and then relearning. But the only way you're going to do that is again, if rooms look very differently, right? If the people that are leading those rooms are differently. So honestly, that you're right. It's $100 million questions. I mean, we can spend 5 hours talking about that, but the best advice right now is just to listen and to make an effort to truly pull people into your table, whatever table that is.
Totally.
You can have coffee, be at work, but the world looks probably vastly different from what it does in your insular.
Yep. No, I mean, I can't do any better than that. I think you hit it on the head, and you're right. Look around you and figure out, are you just talking to the same people all the time? And are you widening your circle? I mean, and even your story in the book about going back to Miami. And I mean, I love that Vidal, I think you figure out, well, maybe you all even lived so close to each other. I mean, this is someone that you would have never known, but you went on this journey, you went on this pilgrimage, if you will. And so there's it's just so great that then you would learn about something that was, here you are on these parallel time frame, but in a very different, totally different experience.
Yeah. And the truth is so much of this exercise was understanding how I, in my entire life, had perpetuated racism in my own ways, right? How I, in my life, had created these circles of what Latinos were based on my family experience. And the second I stepped out of that, you understand that it is completely different, right? And so much of the book was just like a self-reflection on like my own biases, and again, unlearning all of these things, what I had been taught since I was a kid, and I'm still learning, right? It is a constant, it is ongoing. We're making mistakes as we go, but we need to be talking about this.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, and again, that's why I think the whole book is so great, because your openness to even people that you completely disagree with on really important political issues, your ability to bring them in and have a conversation and really understand where they're coming from it's like it goes throughout. And that's actually, I think, the other question that was asked. So thank you, Carly, for putting this. As you went on this journey, what was your reception like? And did you ever experience hesitancy or pushback, joy at people being able to share their story? How did you build the trust? Obviously, I think a large part of that is you, Paola. You just have a way about you that is so disarming and open. But tell you from your point of view, what was it like?
I think that's a good. I think the hardest part, I think, when you're doing these type of stories and just generally, is you always want to be cautious that you're not exploiting someone's story, right? You always want to be very careful about not exploiting someone's voice for your own story, for your own words and book, right? And so to me, you're right. Like building trust was perhaps the hardest thing to do, and the most important thing I had to do throughout the whole book, right? And building trust is, for me, what was very important is that not one single interview that I did was done by the phone, right? Every single chapter, I got on a plane, I went to see the person, and I had a conversation face to face. And honestly, the best parts of the conversations and the interviews was when I wasn't asking questions, when I was literally just sitting there and like observing. That was the best thing, because I was in their space and people were sort of like, the best thing I could do is to get people to forget that I was there, so I could just like observe. And that requires making people feel comfortable with you, right? And it was never in and out trips. It was like I would be at least 3 days with them, 2 days, and build a trust, right? And so and then once you get past that, everyone wants to share their story, right? I think maybe it was different 4 years ago, but at least in the last 2 years, people want to talk. People want to share their stories, and people finally, people know that their voice matters. And so the only thing that I was there to do is just like use my platform and my words to put that in paper, and it's for them, but that's a good question, because I think about it always, and especially now, like I'm about to be reporting in one of the reservations, right? In one of the Native American reservations here in Arizona. And one of the first things that people tell you is like, why are you doing this, right? Like people are sick of the poverty porn. People are sick of these exploitations. So you have to be very, very careful about being extremely genuine. And people know, right? I've been told, like, if people don't want, like, you will be told to leave. And that's also okay, right? And that is part of respecting.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I remember the story you write about in, I don't know if it was Iowa, but the Muslim community, and when one of the women really invites you to be in, in the community. And I just thought that's such a sign that of respect and a recognition that you were there to really understand and listen. And I thought that was beautiful. That must have been a fascinating experience.
That was amazing. That was incredible. Yeah, that just, so for people to know. So one of the chapters when I'm in New York, it's called Invisible. And one of the chapters there is when I come across this like very big Latino Muslim population that's in New York and also in Texas. But anyway, so Latinos, it turns out that we are the demographic that is now converting to Islam at higher rates than any other demographic, right? And there's 1,000 explanations for that, but the best one that I got is when I asked one of the members, I was like, so why, like, what is happening? Why are you choosing this? And he basically said, which I think is just a lesson for all of us. He said, we're told all our lives that we have to be Catholics. No, the moment that someone gives you the freedom to choose, he said, for me, Islam became obvious, right? Because I was given an option to deviate from my norm. And so again, you can apply that in many different ways. Now, when you give people an option to break away, many things can happen, no? And anyway, so it turns out there's this beautiful, huge community. And when I met one of the women, one of the like Latina Muslim leaders, the first thing she told me, because she was observing me and I was observing her, and it was sort of like the men were first like introducing me to their peers and like other Latina Muslims, all men. And she was kind of pissed off about that. She was like, why didn't you go to us first, right? Why did you have to go to them first? And so I remember I told her, I was like, you're absolutely right. Next time I meet you, I will go to you. Right.
You first. No, that was awesome.
Yeah.
So, okay. It doesn't look like you had any other questions. I don't know if you want to talk about what this is going to mean. It seems like you're hopeful. And the book is I guess I will say, if I'm just going to make another plug for this book, I think this is it's an incredible introduction to a wide variety of folks around this country that you would otherwise probably never know about. And so I just think, Paola, you have captured something that is so accessible for anyone and really important. And it almost just feels like, I love that you're now kind of going more deeply into this next round, because this feels like it just begins to lay the table of a generational change that's happening in America.
Yeah.
And but rather than tell it through demographics and this and that, you're telling it through the lived experiences of folks in this country. So I guess maybe we could end on one, anything else that you want to say about the book that folks should know, because I want everyone to buy it and read it and then give it to their friends and family for Thanksgiving or whatever else is coming up. Yeah. No. It's just, I think it's really, it's very inspiring, but it seems like you end on a hopeful note. And I know elections aren't everything. They're just this door that we kind of like push our way through to, hope that we kind of get the boot off our neck and begin to be able to fight back and fight for the things we believe in. But how are you feeling? How are you feeling now? And
I think you're right. Election, they're not everything, but I do think they're at least in this specific case, they're telling us something important, right? Of at least that young Latinos. I hate using the word the sleeping giant, because I think it's not a fair representation. But I think the story now is like Latinos are awake, right? And we are going somewhere. But when I think of these elections, to me the question is always, who did we miss? Right? Mm-hmm. Like who did we miss? Because that is the incredible potential and possibility of this community. Because there are so many hybrids and subcultures, right? And so many different ways to identify us, it truly is really hard to quantify us, right? To truly understand what power is, because you can be an Afro-Latino who has never felt Latino, right? You can be an indigenous person who has never felt like a Spanish-speaking Latino, a trans person that has never felt like a Latina, right? And so I think, to me, that is where the power is, right? The moment that you start bringing in all of these different voices that I touch on the book, and to me, that is the true power of the community, and the true like margins of change that can continue to push us and be making these changes that we're seeing in places like Arizona and in Wisconsin and in Michigan. And so, the way that I think of the book is, to me, that's always the analogy. Like, we keep talking about us and people have all these different stories of us, but imagine if the 60 million Latinos that live in this country, if the sun is shining on us, right? And we all step out of these shadows, no one knows what that image looks like. No one, not even yourself, right? And so that the book tries to start shedding light on and all of these different faces that you never really knew were among you. And I think regardless of how you see it, Latinos will be part of the future, right? Whether you're working in a company, whether you want to work in politics, whether you are organizing, whatever leadership looks like for you, Latinos are part of that formula. And so this book is just 1% of what that story can mean.
Yeah, I love that at the end you write about the number of small businesses that are now being created by Latinos. That is, it just, so yeah. like so much opportunity. Well, someone has given you like the ultimate, like, a really, really kind, wonderful compliment here that you're in the steps of Studs Terkel and Eve Ensler, empathetic listening. And so Paola, okay, everybody, this is what the book looks like. If you haven't seen it yet, it's got a great cover. It's really compelling. And thank you for taking the time to write it. And well, you're going to tell us, Carly, how to buy it and all those good things. But I didn't want to make sure I got my plug in because it's fantastic. I'm so proud of you and so honored to get to be in conversation with you. And can't wait to hear about everything in Arizona.
No, thank you. Thank you so much to everyone for listening and for tuning in. Obviously, it's a great honor, and this is why I did it. So we have these conversations, and so we all keep learning, and so I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I want to also thank you both, Paola and Cecile, for being here tonight and for this great conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. A reminder, if you have not yet, you can get the book on our website. Also, the video was recorded, and the recording will be emailed at some point in the future, so you can share it and get everybody else in on this amazing talk. Thank you again all for being here, and we hope you all stay safe and have a great week.
Thanks so much. Okay, bye-bye. Safe travels.
Thank you.
Bye.